Welcome viewers. This is a special test run of our soon-to-be daily segment, Planet Talk. I am honored to introduce my talented guests, Chad Harris, Erica Jones, and Alex Stein.
Hi, I'm Chad Harris. I am an archetypal astrologer, and my website is archetypalview.com.
And I'm Erica Jones. I'm also an archetypal astrologer, and you'll find me at realimaginal.com, and I do offer consultations.
And I'm Alex Stein, and would you believe it, I am also an archetypal astrologer. And you can find me at alexsteinastrology.com. That's STEIN. And I also offer consultations.
And I'm the official host of this segment, and I'm Renn Butler, and I'm also an archetypal astrologer. I would highly recommend getting readings from all three of these very talented and brilliant colleagues. We have some amazing things to talk about today. The events of the last 48 hours have been a sea change in the American psyche and the world psyche. There's just so much to look at and unpack. We're very happy to be able to share this quality time with people watching in. The first thing we want to do is celebrate the amazing runoff elections in Georgia. Those events have been somewhat overshadowed by the essential coup attempt of yesterday and the tragic loss of life and the amazing turnarounds, and there's just so much to talk about. But we want to just take a moment at the outset to honor what happened in Georgia. Just a few astrological thoughts, and we'll look at the chart as we're going. There's a Jupiter square Uranus alignment in the sky. It's called a world transit, and Uranus correlates with breakthroughs, openings, dramatic quantum leaps. Jupiter amplifies and expands whatever it touches. So this is really an amazing moment, what happened in Georgia. Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff won their Senate races in Georgia on January 5th. And many people thought, it wasn't possible. The events of this week and really of the last 13 years, including the 4 years of Donald Trump's presidency, have occurred during Uranus-Pluto square. It is out of orb at this moment. It is beyond the 10-degree orb that Rick Tarnas observes for outer planet squares, but we are in what he calls the sunset effect. We are in the afterglow of that Uranus-Pluto, and I believe that the events of yesterday are, in a sense, the kind of crowning moment of this Uranus-Pluto square of 2007 to 2020. One of the themes that Rick Tarnas observes during Uranus-Pluto alignments in documents in Cosmos and Psyche are civil rights breakthroughs. Some of the other themes are female empowerment, ecological awareness, gay rights, and others. So here we have an amazing civil rights breakthrough. Warnock is the first African-American to win a Senate seat in Georgia. Ossoff is Jewish. Now, Stacey Abrams is one of the great heroes of this incredible moment. She served as the House Minority Leader in the Georgia House of Representatives. A tireless voting rights activist, she founded the organization Fair Fight Action. She is the first African-American woman to be nominated as candidate for governor by a major party in the United States. And here is Stacey Abrams' chart, and I just wanted to give our panel a chance to look at this in just a moment. We don't have her birth time, so bear in mind, people out there, this is a noon chart. We cannot use the houses. We're not exactly sure where her moon is, but it's almost certainly in a grand trine with Jupiter and Pluto. She has a Jupiter-Pluto trine. That's one of the things that really stands out and that I expected to see the first time I heard her speak. She has an aura of authority, commanding empowerment, a sense of capability, stature, the organizing ability, brilliant gift for organization, really are all things connected with Jupiter, Pluto. And if she was born before 6 p.m., so about a 3/4 chance that she has moon in a grand trine with Jupiter, Pluto. And I'll let some of the guests comment on some of the associations with that. Chad?
Yeah, like you said, the Jupiter Pluto, she speaks and operates from that place of authority and gravitas, and there's a particular way in which you can see her Jupiter Pluto moon grand trine in the empowerment of people, and working hard to bring allow people to have their voice, to have their voices heard, to be empowered, to make a difference. I'd also think that the Saturn square Pluto is a big part of her kind of like determination, her her focus, like you said, the organizing capacity, then the capacity to withstand a difficult defeat as well. She just barely lost the governor's race in 2018, which I think is an interesting thing that if she had won, she would have been attacked by Trump her entire for 2 years, whereas where she wouldn't have been able to do the ground game that ended up leading to the successful runs of the Senate races. So and even Joe Biden's victory there. So it's a really interesting situation where a defeat, a loss, Saturn Pluto kind of lost, also kind of had a greater gift in suffering, and her being able to have resilience to overcome the defeat and use that energy to become more effective.
Yeah, great points. Yeah. Erica?
Yeah, thanks for those thoughts. I haven't looked at her chart, so I just made some quick notes from the wheel that you put up there, Renn. And the first thing that really stood out to me was her Mars opposite Uranus, and the capacity to fight, to really fight for one's, it's Mars fighting for one's revolutionary ideals, Uranus. But it's also, I saw a T-square there with Saturn. So Saturn is in a hard aspect to Mars and Uranus, bringing them all into a dialectic. And I can imagine that throughout her life has presented her with challenges and breakthroughs through perseverance, through that Saturnian quality acting on Mars, forcing Mars to have discipline, to stay with something, to work really hard for those Uranian ideals of freedom, democracy, inclusion. She's been very clear throughout that I've witnessed of her work in Georgia, that it's not about her. She's really fighting on behalf of the people of Georgia to be enfranchised, to have their right to vote, particularly people of color, and bringing attention to the voter suppression that has long been happening in the deep south of the United States. So I also note that she's got a Jupiter return right now. So Jupiter coming back to its natal position as this victory accomplishment that is all that she can also share with the community that she has worked with, the organizers on the ground. We often want to give a lot of credit to these sort of grassroots movements, to individuals, but I'm sure even, she herself, I'm sure, has said, hey, it's taken a team of people to make this happen together. So the position of her moon, it would be interesting to know what her, exactly where her moon is, that collective, collaborative, working with to change our political situation and improve it for everyone. So with that, I will pass to Alex.
Yeah, thanks. I agree. I liked what Chad said about the fact that if Stacey Abrams had won the gubernatorial election, things would be totally different. She would have been attacked again and again and again, and be fighting in this very kind of, in a way that just doesn't work really through her whole term. And I think what we've been missing in politics for years is a real sense that change can happen from below, and that change is totally stalled from above. And I feel like that's also reflected in that Saturn Pluto. I forget what the aspect was, but that sense of kind of permanent stuckness that we've been in, and of course it's becoming ripe now with this Saturn Pluto conjunction. That sense of long-term stuckness that culture has been in. Suddenly we see somebody, I think that she really embodies the ability of people to actually change things and do so in an effective, loving, positive way, which if that moon is in that grand trine, that loving, caring, connecting dimension is in there. I also noticed that she has I believe it was a yod of Mercury, Venus, Saturn, and that kind of bringing, giving voice to the people, restoring a kind of harmony, with Venus, people whose voices haven't been heard, Mercury, against the kind of Saturnian, old rigid structures, and then also of course, the loss, as Chad pointed out, that turned to, the defeat that turned to a better victory, really, a better victory. And then just another thing I've been feeling is is this general turning of the tide, like in what I see as a positive direction, but it's like such a razor thin margin, right? It's just like just barely there, and it is just so perfect, and so it's nice to see somebody who, while she's not in a particularly big position herself, has enabled this real change to occur. So, yeah.
Thank you all. We just want to say congratulations to the people of Georgia for the free and fair election. And both sides worked so hard in this election, and it really was an incredible moment. I stayed up late listening to CNN till about 3 a.m. with Don Lemon and Chris Cuomo to celebrate. Stacey Abrams also has that Venus-Jupiter conjunction, which is that sort of big-hearted, grand, friendly warmth. When she smiles, you just get this sense that everything will be okay. So we really want to honor her. So let us now look at the amazing events of yesterday. So here we have the storming of the U.S. Capitol. They're saying 1:10 p.m. yesterday, and I'll have this chart up as we go through this and unpack some of these archetypal influences. What an amazing moment. Now, as I said, the overarching theme that I believe sort of oversees and encompasses the events of the past 2 months and the past few days is this Uranus square Pluto. You see Pluto here at 24 Capricorn, Uranus 6 Taurus. So it's 12 degrees and 20 minutes or so. It's just outside of the 10-degree allowable orb for squares, but Rick observed consistently what he calls a sunset effect. We are still in the afterglow. It's like when the sun goes down, its colors permeate the sky, and there's sort of rich infusion of those archetypal colors in the collective psyche. So Pluto acting on Uranus empowers the the Uranian archetype toward revolution, change, breakthroughs, progress. We can see this in the major civil rights and democratic rights movements in the past 13 years, since about 2007, in the Arab Spring, the Idle No More, the Occupy movements, female empowerment with the Me Too movement, and many other themes. On the shadow side, this sort of hyperactivated Uranus can lend itself to desire to kind of jump the gun, to rebel even against the very system itself, the precious democracy. While democracy is a very flawed system, it is by far better than any alternative. And it is a very precious and fragile thing. And we saw just how precarious that is yesterday. So the first attempt in US history to effect a legislative coup, people will never forget where they were with the events of yesterday. People will be talking about this for the rest of time, I would imagine, certainly for the next 100 years. This sort of messianic cult of Trumpism, Trump with that Sun Jupiter natal, or Sun Uranus natal trine Jupiter, really lends itself to kind of messianic projections. I am the way forward. I am the light bearer. I will save you from your difficult situations. And sadly, I think he's been able to manipulate a certain sector of the American electorate. People that are unhappy, they feel maybe marginalized, or they don't feel particularly blessed in the American society, like uneducated, Anglo-Saxons, especially males, people aren't happy, and he just seemed to offer a way out. So that's why many people are using the term cult, this sort of slavish devotion to the figure of Donald Trump and being willing to put him above the rule of law, of democracy, and of the Constitution. Now, it's very interesting. Mercury is very close to Pluto right now and squaring Uranus. Some people have been calling the actions of many GOP legislators to encourage and support and enable Trump's totally debunked conspiracy theories about the election as a kind of subversive, revolutionary act. Words matter, and it's like a call for a coup with a gavel rather than a rifle. This is how people were talking about the events leading up to yesterday, when President Trump was hoping that Mike Pence would, with the help of GOP legislators, would somehow overturn the results of the election, which would be totally illegal in that situation. Now, it's interesting that Mars is a very important part of the events of this past 6 months, and right now Mars is conjunct Uranus. 7 degrees is a close conjunction for a world transit, and squaring Pluto. So the Mercury Uranus Pluto, the calls for a coup, the incredible outrageous conspiracy theories, despite being debunked by something like 60 judges, maybe more than 60 judges, including Trump appointed judges. I think they may have won one small case. Every other case was thrown out by the courts. There was this sort of call for action, but it got more physical, more energetic, and violent yesterday, and we can see the influence of Mars catalyzing this angry crowd. So these are some pictures from yesterday. And this classic. Erica, do you want to just say a quick word about this amazing picture?
Sure. Yeah, it's the observation's been making its way around the astrological community online, but Mars just entered the sign of Taurus, Taurus is represented by the bull, And Mars is a warrior figure, the fighting spirit, aggression, and such. And so this person, one epithet I've heard is Q shaman, shows up in such a vivid way and becomes kind of a poster child in a way for what happened in these events. It's just remarkable because Mars has spent a very long time in the sign of Aries during its retrograde in 2020. And the moment it enters Taurus, a new sign, here we have this very Martian figure wearing bull's horns, charging into the Capitol building in search of, well, mischief, trouble, perhaps lawmakers. I'm still waiting to hear reports on all their plans and intentions, which didn't seem to be terribly democratic.
Yeah, thank you. We'll give Chad and Alex a chance in a minute to comment on this as well. Thank you, Erica. Those of you who have been watching the Viking series will relate to this. The first thing I thought of here was this is Davy Crockett meets Ragnar Lothbrok. It's like this return of this crazy Norwegian energy, or this kind of Viking energy that's a part of the American psyche. I think he needs a mate. It actually looks like what's happening there. Now, some other thoughts. The Saturn square Uranus is another major world transit that's happening here. You see Saturn 2 degrees Aquarius in square with Uranus. Interesting ironies here. This was a kind of law and order riot. Trump has said repeatedly that I am the law and order president. And then we've got this sort of anarchist, overthrow of cherished norms about respecting the seat of the US government and so on. Sort of anti-progress rebellion in a way, overturning voting rights legislation, overturning ecological protections legislation have been important hallmarks of Trump's presidency. The events of the last few days, amazing series of breakthroughs followed by fear, and it depends on which side you're on. For Democrats, the election of Warnock and Ossoff was such a blessed moment. But even within that sequence that evening, first it looked like the Democrats went up in the count, and then the Republicans were up in the count, and then the Democrats, as they counted more of the mail-in ballots and the certain areas in Georgia, were both able to prevail. So it had that Saturn-Uranus quality of sudden changes and a lot of emotion activated. It would have been, mirror imaged by Republicans, a feeling of fear and then hope and then fear again. And then the overall breakthrough of that election was then dramatically eclipsed by the events of yesterday. So it really has that Saturn-Uranus quality. One of the pundits on CNN, a Republican woman, said, sometimes change is painful, but change is necessary. And this is a very concise way of describing the Saturn-Uranus square. Now, this is a very intense Saturn-Uranus square because it's involved with Pluto. It's Saturn-Pluto conjunction the last 2 years and for this coming year as well. In square with this Uranus, Pluto empowering and bringing into manifestation with enormous force the themes associated with Saturn-Uranus. The Saturn-Pluto per se often brings a feeling of apocalyptic fear, the fear around COVID. This past year would certainly fit that, the pandemic. The last time they were conjunct was in the early 80s with the onset of the AIDS epidemic, HIV, and also the rapid escalation of the nuclear arms race. Chad is going to review this as well, but the one before that was the late 40s, beginning of the Cold War, and the one before that was 1913 to 1915, I believe, the beginning of World War I. So you can see the flavor of these periods, intense pressure bearing down on the collective psyche like a hard birth contraction. And there's a lot of fear in the, some of the heartland Republican areas of American society of this demographic and cultural eclipse. They may not be as sort of familiar with other, racial groups, in their communities, that they don't have as many friends in, other like racial groups within America. They're not as interested in other kinds of music from around the world. The amazing food that are from around the world. They may not have the same kind of openness or tolerance to other religions and so on. There's a tremendous fear in this Republican heartland of the demographic change. And I just want to say that from my point of view, this sort of cross-fertilization of cultures and food and art and interracial marriage and even the richness of the world religions, all teaching the same things about peace and kindness, tremendous benefit for all of us. It will make for a much more interesting and exciting and enriching way of living. And it's not something to be afraid of. Somebody said yesterday, it was actually a Republican senator whose name I've forgotten, the GOP must get out of the business of culture wars and back into the realm of serving society. And he's really one of the sane ones. I believe he was a fighter pilot. He has a picture of himself in a plane in his office. The events of the last few months, shaking the bedrock of our society, Saturn, Pluto, square Uranus, very similar to what happened in 1929 to 33 during the Wall Street crash and the beginning of the Great Depression, when there was a T-square of Saturn, Uranus, and Pluto. That was the birth of Stan Grof as well, and who talks a lot about death and rebirth. We are in a titanic death rebirth struggle, but it's a death rebirth struggle for the entire human soul, humanity. It's one where we all have to win together. We can all win together. It's not anymore about our group prevailing over your group. What's trying to happen is we have to get together to solve our urgent ecological problems, our urgent problems around war, nuclear proliferation, and so on. Now, Mercury, why don't I stop there and we can do another round?
Sure, thank you, Renn. Thanks for walking through the larger gestalt that we're in right now. For me, I think I was just noticing the Saturn Uranus of how Uranus actually has a lot in common with Saturn in terms of arrogating authority to itself. In order to overthrow something, you do have to say, I'm the authority. Actually, I know the way forward. I know what to do. And the invasion of the US Capitol building by people who believe that the election was stolen. And by the way, I actually go with consensus reality on this. I think that Biden did win the election. The election fraud has been settled in the courts all the way to the Supreme Court. So whenever, this is why my archetypal analysis looks the way it does. So the invasion of the US Capitol by people I would call deluded patriots, because perhaps genuine, I think they do think that Trump won. It really invokes that Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus complex in the sky right now. And they think that, they're inhabiting this alternate reality and taking up the Jupiter Uranus, which correlates strongly to the idea of democracy in history. And they're actually assaulting the institution of democracy by stopping the vote. And so I would give the institution of democracy to Saturn there. And here's this, sort of Jupiter Uranus, we're going to come and stop this from happening, thinking that they're acting on behalf of the democratic impulse. It just gets so confusing trying to inhabit these two different realities, the splitting that has happened through that Saturn Pluto transit that we've had, where there's just been such a profound polarization of identity, polarization across society. and sort of inhabiting different silos of information. And it's sort of like watching the fruit of the disintegration of the media ecosystem over, the last decade, I would say, which you outlined sort of the times that we've been in of Uranus, Pluto, and all these revolutions in technology, especially where Pluto is really driving that Uranian like vision of the future and of what is new and what is possible and technological breakthrough. So with Jupiter Uranus also correlating very strongly to technological breakthrough, I'm seeing sort of the Saturnian problematic side of that kind of coming in and showing that, well, innovation's great, but we do need to take care of how we interweave what is our state of our interdependence, essentially. So those are just a few things that came up for me yesterday. And Alex, would you like to take it from here?
Sure, thanks. Yeah, I agree with what you said, Erica, about the kind of interplay of Uranus and Saturn and how they could kind of reflect each other. And that's something that has been, that was on my mind yesterday, the way that, extremes of liberalism and conservatism or radicalism flip on one another. It's almost like the yin yang thing. It's like you go far enough in one direction and all of a sudden it's just popping up from the center right there. And, the word that came to my mind was what was right-wing anarchism, right? Like we haven't really seen, like we associate anarchy with like the left, right? But this is like right-wing anarchism that we're experiencing. So that's an interesting combo there. I was also struck by the fact that Mercury was in all of this, and and also just the fact that in the chart, if we're going with 1:10 p.m. as the kind of the time of the storming of the Capitol, that so many of the big players in the chart were up on the midheaven. Pluto, Mercury, Saturn, Pluto, Mercury, Saturn, I guess, and then. So Mercury, like so much about the last several years, and I think this was maybe since, I think the word alternative facts or the phrase was coined during a Saturn Neptune square, which kind of makes sense. But what we saw yesterday was really the fruition of like this whole alternative reality circus that we've been living, and the fact that people live in completely different worlds based on their interpretation of things. And, I read a really interesting essay recently by Gary Lockman. He writes on like esoteric history and stuff. He wrote something called Trickle Down Metaphysics, where he's basically talking about how, like before his death or before he lost his mind, Nietzsche basically, he said like nihilism's coming, like it's coming, to our society. It's going to happen in 200 years, but it kind of feels like we've lived 2 centuries since he said it. And he kind of, in this essay, he kind of follows the whole like deconstructionist movement and everything to a point where truth is up for grabs, right? And that sort of has been a reality among like philosophers and thinkers and critically minded people. But he makes the point that like by some kind of osmosis of the zeitgeist, like it's now just, it's in the living rooms of like ordinary people, right? And this is reflected with reality TV. And Trump is like a savant-like genius in this regard. He's like, he probably knows nothing about any of this philosophy or anything, but he just has the knack, and so he came at the right time. And what we saw yesterday was just like, it was so generated from just the lie after lie after lie after lie after lie. And another interesting thing about it too is it's finally the straw that broke the camel's back as far as the social media platforms saying no to Trump. Twitter suspended him, Facebook suspended him finally, you know, and, you know, and I see some Jupiter, Pluto, Mercury stuff in there with like the power grab as relates to information. And yeah, but there were a lot of parts of me kind of being stirred up yesterday as I was thinking this, as I was just following this, because, you know, on the one hand, on the human level, it's, and on like my own personal ideological level, like it was horrifying. And, you know, at least one woman died. I think I heard that maybe some more died as well. You know, and just the blatant assault on democracy and everything, it's very upsetting. But at the same time, a part of me was like, agreed with my friend who posted on Facebook, I'm shocked and surprised that anybody is shocked and surprised. It's like, this was coming. Of course this was coming. Like, where did we think all of this Trumpism was leading? It's like, duh. But at the same time, I have been really feeling, like I think I already mentioned, a great shift, like a real lightning and positivity as far as where we are actually going. And so part of me was like, another part of me yesterday was a little unperturbed by it. It was like, well, this is just, you know, what the collective psyche has to do. We got to go through this spasm, but like something better is coming, as we saw with the election in Georgia, with the results of the presidential election. And man, lost my train of thought. Damn it. I think it'll come to me.
It's all right. It's a breakthrough moment. Yeah. Like you're saying, there's more to it than just the darkness that we're perceiving. Yeah. Personally, like we were discussing earlier, I really have a really optimistic view on all of it, honestly. Even Trump's presidency, period. Because it seems as though we are, you know, in the midst of a death rebirth transformation, you know, a rite of passage for humanity. It's not just the United States, or, you know, the overarching issue that is, I think, you know, overhead of everything is the climate catastrophe that is happening and will continue to happen. And, you know, humanity's goal at this point is sustainability. It's something we haven't yet achieved, and our survival depends on it. And I think there is this way in which we consciously or unconsciously are aware of this limit that we're operating within, and that will continue to press on us and make our existence more difficult. And I honestly, I kind of think, like, you know, the ideation behind the movement towards the age of Aquarius, or even the QAnon conspiracy storm, you know, awakening, and you know, the Christian rapture, and it all points, you know, there's this, in a way in which, like let's say Christianity points to this moment in history, and then we actually do have a threatening potential apocalypse, like a literal apocalypse that is just around the corner potentially for us. And there's this way in which I think these things are constellating part of, or they're influencing what's constellating our psyche. And you know, like we were discussing before, like with the Saturn Pluto cycles that you were mentioning, Renn, World War I, a conjunction, World War II, another conjunction, or no, the square, then the end of World War II, another conjunction, the beginning of the Cold War, and then the 80s, the beginning, or pretty much the end, the peak of the Cold War, and the beginning of the end of the Cold War. And we are now again in another conjunction, and we're in essence, the the world order that was created at the end of World War II is coming to an end. And we can clearly see that China is an emerging superpower. And in many ways, the United States is declining. So there's, these giant shifts that are taking place that are part of influencing our moment-to-moment experience. So I think maybe I will share my screen with you. Can I do that, Renn? Yeah, great. And
we were just talking about the Mercury-Saturn conjunction. There's this incredible circular argument going around, which in the legal terminology is called a spacious circular argument. So some of these GOP senators, people like Ted Cruz, for example, are saying, people are talking about election irregularities, and Josh Hawley, and so they feel somehow justified, or they feel obligated to get on this sort of conspiracy theory that the presidential election was somehow not fair. People are talking about election irregularities, is what they say, but they're talking about them because the same GOP legislators have been sharing those conspiracy theories, sending out tweets and so on at rallies, repeating these sort of baseless allegations about election irregularities. So this really fits that kind of Mercury-Saturn. Saturn, in this case, also is showing up as the irrefutable truth. Some of the amazing, like the conversation that Trump had with the Georgia Secretary of State that was recorded and then released, I think the day before the Georgia election, where the Georgia official is basically just saying, no, no, no. I'm sorry, Mr. President, the problem is the facts you have are wrong. This, we can really see that sort of the buck stops here, Mercury-Saturn moment for Trump. Well, Trump is kind of like at the end of Lawnmower Man, where he's like desperately looking for some way to escape, is being kind of just held back by the facts, by the reality of the situation. There's another glaring truth in this whole conspiracy theory that Trump has been putting forth, that the election was illegitimate, which is that if his own loss is illegitimate, then the GOP wins on those same ballots must also be illegitimate. You don't see some of these senators and congressmen getting up and saying, Trump's loss was based on election fraud or something, but my win on those same ballots is actually true. I mean, if the Democrats were somehow able to cheat on an election like that, you'd think they would want to, win a lot more of the down ballot races at the same time. The Republicans did very well in this election, but not in the presidential side of it. People rejected Trump by 7 million votes in the country, but many Republicans won their elections. And so this is another completely spacious argument that people aren't aware of this glaring fact. And then Mercury-Saturn we can also see as the cynical disenfranchisement of voters in a way. Mercury is about the paperwork, the act of writing in your choice and so on. And this, the Jim Crow laws suppressing the vote that Erica was talking about, that have essentially been revived in various more sort of hidden forms by Republican officials in various states. Okay, let's see here. Okay, here. Now, Pluto adds intensity and sort of darkness and heaviness to this Mercury-Saturn. We can see this very strong Mercury-Saturn Pluto conjunction at the top of the chart that Alex was talking about. This is from yesterday. One pundit on CNN said, people are so far down these rabbit holes of misinformation that they are essentially seem to be living in a different universe. Erica mentioned it as silos of opinion, these media bubbles, this self-reinforcing prisons where people can't see outside to consensus reality because they've been essentially brainwashed by these baseless conspiracy theories put forth by Trump and his enablers. But yesterday was a turning point, as I think several of you have mentioned this Saturn reality principle, the consensus reality that Erica has mentioned, weighing in, and the facts are Trump lost the election. And it is just so dangerous what many people are doing in the GOP side, not all by any means, but some to kind of convince people that the election was illegitimate. It is very dangerous for the future of democracy in the United States. Another correlation with this Mercury, Saturn, Pluto for me is talk among many newscasters now, and also senators and Congress people, how important it is to remember the disgraced names, to not let them just sweep it under the rug, to after Trump is gone, to say, I wasn't really thrilled by his policies. I wasn't that close. I wasn't part of the conspiracy. It's important, this sort of reckoning that, their political future should have a reality check on them by the actions they have taken in this consequential time. And that really fits that. Now, the Jupiter-Pluto conjunction here. This Jupiter-Pluto is often connected with high drama, international intrigue, power trips of the grandest form. This is the highest drama imaginable that we've been seeing. As Rick Tarnas put it in a conversation the other day, it's like the fate of the world hanging in the balance day after day. People that have faith in American democracy, not only for America, but as an example to the rest of the world, this is a really important moment. And there is that sort of plutonic power issues and sort of evolutionary struggle, but sort of expanded and amplified by Jupiter here. Jupiter-Pluto connection with power grabs and power trips. As I said, many GOP legislators have been willing to sacrifice and essentially sell out the democracy in their country to support their own careers. Many of the, the most outspoken ones are seen as presidential hopefuls in 2024. So they don't want to alienate Trump's base. They want Trump to endorse them. If Trump doesn't run again, they need the support of that base. And so they've been willing to essentially sell out their ideals, giving up their integrity to support a corrupt demagogue on a power trip, putting Donald Trump before the Constitution. Really fits that Jupiter-Pluto. Acting even though they know it's wrong. People like Ted Cruz, I mean, he's by all accounts a brilliant jurist, highly educated at Harvard Law School, I believe. He knows what he's doing is wrong, but the people that they are co-opting into these conspiracy theories, they don't know. The uneducated masses of Southern and Midwestern voters, that is the core of the Republican Party, they can be misled. They don't have many of them, the 70%, they don't have the discrimination to be able to tell what's real and what's not. They need leadership, and they're not getting proper leadership. Our friend and colleague, Rebecca Farrar, yesterday was, we had a phone conversation, and she was just talking about the hyperactivated Jupiter at this time. So Jupiter square Uranus, Jupiter square Mars, Jupiter conjunct Pluto, intense feelings of righteousness, tendencies toward hyperbole and extremism, both sides thinking that this is the greatest, this is the most important battle. And, it seems like, especially on the GOP side, with some of these radio commentators in the Republican side of American society have been waging this kind of really hyped up ideological battle against change, you know, for about the last 20 years. And many people, even within the GOP, are saying, you know, we need to calm that down. It needs to cool down. People are using also terms like the fever must break. The fever will break. I believe that fever is now breaking. Yesterday was the climax of Trumpism, and it'll be downhill from here. I feel like he shot his load completely. That was all they had, and from now on, I believe, you know, in 2 weeks he will no longer be president. A lot more books will come out. More Republicans will come forward and finally show some courage, you know, too late, and you know, talk about just the corrupt practices that within his pregnancy. There's the perinatal influence here within his presidency. So I'm also optimistic and hopeful, and I believe that the main threat is, you know, going forward into other elections, if things are much closer than they were in this presidential election, and some state legislators are sort of willing to go along with a president who's trying to corrupt the election to his or her way, that could be very dangerous. The seeds are not really infertile ground in America for something like Nazism. You know, I mean, Trump is really like a bargain basement kind of dictator. I think he has those authoritarian tendencies, no question about it. I think he really is more of an entertainer who had no business being president. He doesn't have that focus, that laser, hateful focus of something like an Adolf Hitler. You know, he certainly has some, like all humans do, but not like to that degree. You know, the conditions that made Nazism take root were, you know, the horrible conditions in Germany after World War I, the war guilt clause, the reparations payments, the hyperinflation, and the tremendous battle between communism and sort of more right-wing elements. There was kind of a threat of communism after the Bolshevik Revolution spreading to Germany. We don't have any of those conditions. So, you know, I feel a sense of relief that, you know, this brush with totalitarianism is really over. Now, just briefly, a couple other influences, the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction here. Many people are talking about the difference in responses to this, as Alex said, sort of right-wing anarchist mob and the Black Lives Matter protests. I mean, if that during Black Lives Matter protests of much smaller sizes, there were, you know, they brought in riot police and the National Guard and so on. And Jupiter-Saturn is about differences. It's about prejudice, one group of haves and another group of have-nots. Polarities, differences is within the purview of Jupiter-Saturn. Hyper activated right now by, you know, Pluto, Mercury, also Uranus and Mars, all hitting this Jupiter-Saturn. Trump's disputes about the election are always focused on African-American population strongholds, such as Atlanta, Detroit, Philadelphia, etc. There really is a racist conscious undercurrent in his conspiracy theories. He's simply unwilling to accept the votes of African Americans as legitimate or equal to those of other Americans. And, you know, we saw that racism and sort of white supremacy tendencies in Trump in the birther movement, this cruel theory that President Obama was not actually an American citizen. He wasn't born in the United States. So this is a definite major part of Trump's legacy. However, now on the positive side, Throughout the past 2 months of crisis since the election, as Rick Tarnas said, the moral center has held. Jupiter, Saturn. This is a side of Americans, like moderate Republicans, good Republicans who believe in the ideals of democracy. They were not willing to sell that out under pressure from a corrupt authoritarian president. Many state Republican officials, Trump-appointed judges, and even some Senate Republicans, I typo there, have done their jobs and acted responsibly, and they will forever be heroes in the Republic of the United States. Now, this down to, I think, my last slide here, and thanks for bearing with me. I'm really looking forward to hearing from the rest of you on our panel today. Now, this is Donald Trump's natal chart, and this is what's called a bi-wheel for people out there. This is where the planets are now, today. So interacting with his natal chart. And Chad has done some wonderful work on looking at Donald Trump's chart. You can look back at the Archetypal Astrology and Transpersonal Psychology group on Facebook, and also Chad's Facebook group Archetypes in the News. Done some wonderful scholarship and research around here. So we're really glad to have him on the panel today. People have said Trump's mood has darkened recently. For me, the main transit here, the most powerful one, is this transiting Pluto at 24 Capricorn is in opposition with his Venus Saturn. And, you know, he's about halfway through that. He's going to have that for at least 2 more years. I don't expect this will be an easy time for him. People can feel under transits like this any innate feelings of being unworthy or unlikable or unlovable, which is the shadow side of the Venus Saturn aspect, could be intensified and brought into conscious experience with a lot of power during a transit like this. As James Moran pointed out, the transiting Saturn here is about to move into opposition with his natal Pluto, beginning in a month or two for the rest of this year. So he's going to have Pluto, Saturn both ways. Those are not easy transits. It's like an empowered Saturn, the archetype of consequences, of karma, of cause and effect, of limits, boundaries, feelings of failure. The positive side, these transits can be wonderful times for deep and systematic self-exploration. Think of Stan Grof, born with a Saturn-Pluto opposition, or Saturn-Pluto square rather. This sort of focused, sustained, deep inner work under Saturn-Pluto, facing death, facing one's fear. And, the best case scenario for Trump would be to, do some deep self-exploration. I'm not trying to be condescending here. I've done plenty of deep self-exploration. I've needed to do it, therapy, healing work, healing the past traumas. And this Pluto is bringing up a side of Trump that would be probably rooted in feelings of being unloved or being loved conditionally, and then all this toxic compensation with high achievement and winning and so forth. Now, about the phone call that he made, he solicitation for election fraud. He may face legal jeopardy now in the state of Georgia, for which he cannot pardon himself or be pardoned. He's also facing possible jeopardy by New York State prosecutors. His very intelligent niece, Mary Trump, said, we're seeing a man in a position he has never been in before. And this can fit that Pluto opposition natal Saturn. His natal Sun trine Jupiter lends itself to being spoiled, being born with a silver spoon in his mouth, getting away with all kinds of ethical infractions with no consequences. Sun trine Jupiter, the Teflon quality. Ronald Reagan had this as well. I think Sun square Jupiter. Believes he should get whatever he wants. And then finally, you know, there's a real positive side to Sun Jupiter too. He's confident, outgoing, expressive, dramatic, and I mean, a natural performer. And that's what I think he should have stayed. Venus, Saturn, square Jupiter, as Mary Trump puts it, transactional relationships. He's essentially prepared to throw anyone under the bus. These sort of challenging Venus aspects, you know, this sort of, he was about to throw Pence under the bus. And in a way, Pence is the luckiest man in America from what happened yesterday. He was about to have his reputation in among Republicans base destroyed by Trump if he didn't go along with the coup. And then that sort of, you know, intrusion into the Capitol building happened. And then many people had a change of heart and they weren't going to support the coup. And so the vice president was off the hook. So I saw him laughing a little bit later. I'm sure he's greatly relieved. So here's Trump recently, I'm quite sure. And then this one, somebody wrote, inexpressibly sad. And this would really fit that Pluto, Venus, Saturn. There's a Buddhist expression. We can't remove the shoe of ego. We have to wear it out. And Trump represents a part of the American psyche, the part of the Euro-American psyche, of which Canada is certainly a part. And he's a pure embodiment of a certain part of our psyches that has been given power by the gods and goddesses in this moment in history to show us a side of ourselves. And then finally, you know, societal progress often seems to happen as 2 steps forward, 1 step backward. And I believe that Trump's influence represents a major step backward. And I hope we will have now a chance for a Green New Deal of any form would be a step in the right direction, as Chad mentioned. So I'll just leave that for there. And yeah. So this is Trump's Mars, Saturn, Pluto midpoint. Yeah, you mentioned that in a talk we saw online the other day. Very good observation there, Chad.
Yeah, it's what I wanted to kind of focus on is just to point out that he is a Saturn Pluto person with Mars all drawn in the configuration. So, and the way that I think one important way that we can see this coming through that's really deeply affected our entire society is psychological splitting. And he does this like all the time in the sense where Saturn is the boundaries that we put up in relationship, and Pluto tends to intensify those boundaries. And there's a way in which he psychologically splits into us versus them. And the tendency with this is to project the evil or what we don't like in ourselves onto the other outside of the boundaries. And we identify all the good in the world to be inside of the boundaries. And so it's, you're either with us, you're either loyal to me, or you're against me. And the way that he came into power was doing just that. It's America first. We're going to put up our boundaries, and we have all the good, and the rest of the world is to be feared and to be repressed. And that ideation has come into our cultural discourse in a way that's much more evident and much more profound than it had been. I mean, this is something that's in all of us, but what happens is during Saturn Pluto periods, like we've been in since 2018, the tendency for collective psychological splitting becomes more rampant, like World War I or World War II, or during other Saturn Pluto periods where an intense level of splitting and othering tends to come into our experience. So this seems to be one of the most kind of profound or important complexes that he's working with that has been transmuted in essence into our culture, and he's kind of carrying that torch. So I think the other thing I was going to point out is that this is the chart for yesterday, and you know, we've been in this Saturn Pluto period where, you know, the othering that he initially placed on Mexicans or Muslims, that is now very much a Democrat Republican division. You know, that's always been happening, but he's made it to the point where the other is seen as evil. Like Democrats are seen as evil now, and we are internalizing that and fearing Republicans. So it seems as though, you know, this has been a strong driving force of what's been happening in culture in general. And then if we back up and just look at what's taken place over the past several months, like we mentioned, Mars is just leaving its retrograde period. So it's been in Aries for the past several months. And what was happening, it was forming a square with the Saturn-Pluto conjunction since August. So we've been working with this aggressive, potentially violent energy that has been in many ways just simmering in the background for the past several months, coming out at different points. And then yesterday, when it was really tight with Mercury and Saturn, we had this kind of culmination. And what's interesting about it is, you know, not only is it Mercury and Saturn, but the moon moved into the opposition, you know, and that's the people and everyone's, you know, the masses, and everyone's feeling the agitation. And clearly the events themselves had that effect on the collective psyche as we all witnessed it. You know, I was talking with friends and everyone had this, like, you know, it's like we're being triggered in a perinatal kind of process, you know, like we're identifying with the birth struggle that's taking place, and we're resonating with the trauma. And you know, I want to point out that, like, I genuinely see all of what's happening as really a healing process. Like, in so many ways, Trump represents the shadow of who we are: misogynist, patriarchal, racist, you know, utilitarian, disenchanted, mechanistic, you know, the shadow of the modern Western identity that emerged out of the Enlightenment. He represents that in a very clear way where it's easy to see. And kind of what's beautiful about this is, you know, this is the way fascism happens. And it didn't happen because he's so incompetent, and he also is so transparent. He speaks the quiet part out loud. There's no place where he is actually able to hide his psyche, because he doesn't do the critical self-analysis and critical self-reflection. So that's not even a part of his psychological disposition. It doesn't have that second order thinking that we kind of take for granted. In essence, it's almost like first order thinking. It's just outwardly. And so, I mean, if he's doing self-reflection, it's a narcissistic self-reflection. It's like, how am I the best? He's never looking at himself critically as to what have I done wrong. And ultimately, this is why he fails over and over and over again. It's why he couldn't adjust yesterday. And supposedly the tweet that he did say, like, when he said something like trying to get it to end, it was because people were resigning in his administration. He was trying to get people to quit resigning. It wasn't even because he wanted the actions to stop. So ultimately, you know, the way in which he has embodied the racist side of who we are, the misogynist side of who we are, the dictatorial, rapacious, whatever. It's like, but he's done it in a way that allows us to see it. He hasn't been able to control it and utilize that power in a manipulative way. He actually hasn't been successful. He hasn't been able to become a tyrant, become a dictator. And all this is extremely healthy for us to have happened, for us to see the depth of the racism in the United States. You know, he has brought this up to a point where we can't not look at it. We have to address it. We have to be, work to integrate this. So just so many ways in which I believe he's such a powerful, positive symbol for what's taking place. Now, what I want to do real quick is just show how over the past several events, like here, I'm gonna go back to the beginning. When he fired James Comey, hopefully this will come up. So Mercury was square to his natal Saturn when he fired James Comey. The reason that this all is happening to him is the karmic consequences of his corrupt nature. His lack of integrity, his relationship with the archetype of Saturn is that he doesn't honor any other sense of authority. He doesn't have any respect for others. And so because of that, and he's going through this long Pluto opposite Saturn transit that Renn mentioned, this is what's happening. The karmic consequences of his inability to honor the healthy parts of Saturn is what's coming out. We're seeing the shadow revealed. And so it seems as though, I mean, maybe what I'll just do is I'll just say it like, there were 4 major eclipses during his presidency. The first one happened right around Charlottesville, just 10 days. And that eclipse was conjoining his Mars, where he, kind of sanctioned the anger in a sense for people to come out and be okay to wear the anger on the shirt sleeve. The next alignment, the next major eclipse was on his Saturn. And it was just a few days before he met with Putin in Helsinki and betrayed the United States. He showed his traitorous nature, his lack of integrity, his Saturn. So the shadow, the eclipse shone the light of the lack of his integrity. And then the next one was on his Mercury. And that was just right before the perfect call that he was impeached for. And then the next eclipse happened on the day of, on December 14th, which was the day of the Electoral College vote, correct? And, that eclipse was exactly on his sun, or I'm sorry, it was exactly on his moon and opposite his sun. And what we are seeing is the full depth of his shadow, kind of like what Renn was saying, he shot his load. It's like there's a way in which we have kind of seen a culmination of the full, I want to say full because I think there's still more to come, but a really wide, broad sense and clear sense of who he is. The fact that he's betrayed everyone in his life, and now he has clearly betrayed everyone in the United States, and everyone can see it, that he's doing this for him. Not everyone, but most people, more and more people are seeing it because the revelation of the eclipse taking out of the shadows his full corrupt nature. So what I was saying there at the end was about his about where Mercury is, that Mercury was on that alignment in yesterday. So this is where Mercury was yesterday, square to Mars. This is when he was giving his speech. What's interesting is Mercury was at 25 degrees Libra on the night of the election, when he, or say the 7th, when he, or the 10th or whatever it was, when he, the 7th, I think, when he came out and said fraud, that it was stolen from him. That was another point where Mercury was on this axis, either conjoining Pluto, square to Pluto, square to his Saturn or whatnot. You see what I'm saying? So like, he fired James Comey. He suggested drinking bleach. He said fraud for the election. And then yesterday, drawing out an insurrection in the collective. These decisions, these places where he's bringing his voice out with Mercury on this important axis, on his natal Saturn, we're getting clear evidence of consequential Saturn, consequential negative consequential decisions that are lasting for an enduring period of time, where the consequences of those decisions are never leaving him, in essence. So it's an interesting correlations that point towards how we need to engage in self-reflection, and how astrology can help us, not fall into those traps when they're happening. Let me see if I can go back to, here's what's happening today. And
Chad, can we just hold off on that?
Sure.
Erica is going to have to go. So Erica, would you like to chime in at this point? Chad, thank you so much for what you just shared.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right on. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Renn. And thank you, Chad. So trying to, to try to bridge a little bit, I'm going to have a little bit of a Saturn Uranus. Let's go this direction from that. But the fact that there was an attempted coup, okay, there was an attempt to subvert the democratic process, emerging out of many factors that Chad illustrated within Donald Trump's psyche and psychic power that has drawn so much out of the unintegrated parts of the national psyche, if we could speak of such a thing. In response to all of that, those, I'm amongst those who have had a great deal of not only concern about this administration, what it's doing to the institution of democracy, but to individual groups within our society, the targeting of people, and the incitement of hatred and more division. So whenever he just, was clearly saying, I'm not going to concede, I'm not going to give up the election, I'm going to be the next president, a national organizing movement emerged called Choose Democracy. And there's another organization called Hold the Line. And I've been watching a website that was produced called isthisacoup.com, where you could go and check in on what, by the metrics of these organizations, which have studied coups, how they have happened and how they are made impossible, how resistance has stopped them from happening. You could go and check and just kind of see where these organizations thought we were on the scale of an attempted coup preparations, or were in it. And it's very well put together for anyone who's interested in looking at that. And whenever I attended one of the trainings of how to participate in resisting a coup, it was attended by many thousands of people, all over the United States. I wish I had the number. It was pretty amazing. And it embodied so much of that Saturn Uranus in not being a traditional organizing effort. Because, usually when I'm thinking about, oh, you're Uranian, I'm coming together to change something, aligning with like-minded people to accomplish a certain set of values is what happens. And in this, scenario, whenever you're trying to stop a coup, you're trying to actually preserve Saturn. You're trying to prevent this destabilizing, more of the Uranian force from coming in, and also having to set aside differences and join with people who you might really disagree with, but you agree, we want a democracy. And it was so interesting just to think about how different it is to come together on a very baseline level. I think someone else said earlier that we have this much larger crisis looming over us of climate change. I call it the sixth mass extinction, just like the major impact of industrial civilization on the earth. There's this greater thing that we need to come together and fight. And there's also all these other gnarly problems of how different groups are impacted that don't agree with each other, have been inflamed. These divisions have been inflamed, and racial anxiety has been manipulated and used that make it so complicated. It's so much. Saturn Uranus is very much, it's change experience through crisis for sure, but that the mistake, a really bad mistake of and having to that feeling, that overwhelming feeling of something having gone wrong, and that feels irredeemable. And I think that's often, you know, Saturn really judging Uranian attempts to move forward, attempts to try to do something different, and holding it back, saying, no, there's something else here you have to attend to. So you know, there's just so many oppositions and so many opposites within this entire situation. And Renn mentioned in the Mercury, Saturn, Pluto analysis of calls from lawmakers to make sure that we remember who participated in the attempted coup, who is touting disinformation. I would say disinformation, not misinformation. There's actually intention behind this. It's not just, oh, I had the wrong information. And those who are sharing inaccuracies and straight up, you know, falsehoods. And it really reminded me of the need for commissions to establish truth of what happened after national tragedies and atrocities in different countries. I've studied restorative justice processes where if you don't bring a society together to establish what really happened and establish basically a new consensus reality, then you're going to have all these different groups who are impacted differently and have different information carrying all these different stories. It's so destabilizing for a society. And I think that this Saturn square Uranus that we're going to be dealing with for another couple of years, followed by Saturn conjunct Neptune, which don't even get me started. Like I feel like I see and I feel the healing potential in that, because it gives us the potential to discover social stability, but it's going to require a break with the past. And that's that Saturn Uranus, like the sudden break with the past. The past that's filled with denial, or just not seeing the many different stories and narratives of what America has been to the different people who make it up and the communities who make it up. And so I don't think there's a simple way forward. I feel you know, how problematic it is and all the tension. And so the sitting and the difficulty together, wow. How to accomplish that, holding this tension of the opposites with a great deal of care and loving and not knowing, you know, like a genuine humility. That's one possibility. And I feel the pressure on that from the Saturn Pluto that we've just come out of, that kind of birth process of creating tremendous pressure to grow up fast. And that's so much what I feel of, you know, the plutonic intensification of Saturn's maturation process. Who belongs here? What are our responsibilities to each other? What are our gifts to give to each other? Whose gifts are being lost in an oppressive structure? It's actually not serving everyone. And so, I'm kind of with the tension of all of that, and within the person of Trump, who I mean, it's so uncertain. Who knows what this guy's going to do? And what his base is going to do, and what sort of genuine healing can happen, as opposed to a spiritual bypass kind of, oh, we need healing, so we're not going to look at the problems. I don't think that's going to fly. That's just, there's too much that, as almost like a Luciferic being, Trump has brought forth to be metabolized. And I really pray for loving kindness, compassion, and a sense of the larger picture that we're in to inform that process as different leaders who may be younger people stepping forward now to assist with that in this time. So I think that's what I have for this meeting, and I'm afraid I have to go already. I'm sorry to miss what you have to say, Alex. But thank you so much for this opportunity, Renn. Thank you, Chad and Alex. And
thanks, Erica.
Many prayers.
You so much.
Blessings to all of you.
Yes, thank you, Erica.
Congratulations on
thank you.
That the coup was unsuccessful.
Yes, yes. Thank you.
Alex?
Okay. I'll just kind of get my bearings for a little bit. So I think, going back to what you were talking about, Chad, with that was awesome. What you showed about the eclipses triggering, kind of going along and just peeling back different layers of shadow in Trump. And I think one thing that I'm struck with Trump is that he's such a perfect, he's such a perfect embodiment of the collective shadow that we have to be really careful, you know, at least as liberals, to not just project all our shadow onto him. And I mean, that's, you know, so many people are doing that, and it's so easy to get caught in that, and so easy to want to do that. But I almost make a thought experiment out of anything that Trump does is like, what if I did that? You know? And I think that that's important because, you know, to me, that's the way forward. That Trump is a gift to the extent that we are able to let him shine that light on ourselves. And, you know, if I just kind of think about this in the larger context of things, like I grew up in the 90s. I was born in 83. So grew up in the 90s and, you know, under the Uranus-Neptune conjunction, just like in school at that time, what I was being fed, I really had this sense that like, man, we overcame stuff. Like humanity is better than it used to be. You know, we're good. And like, you know, obviously like, you know, Saturn, Pluto rolls around and it's like, no, humanity's bad. And it's like, well, so I've kind of got pendulum fatigue at this point with these things. But, you know, as the millennials kind of step into positions of power, you know, and carry that Uranus, Neptune energy that they have natally into things, you know, so much of that sense of the goodness and the rightness and it in an innocent way, not like an almost non-egoic, like just innocently believing like, no, we're good and we're right. And that's bad. Like, it's very easy to kind of sidestep the shadow. And so that's the danger that I see, I guess, going forward. Another element that I think Trump shows so amazingly, and that I think is showing up in the Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto stuff, is that like the shadow of positivity and positive thinking. Like America is a really, you know, we're a positive nation. Like we're can-do kind of people here, and Trump has embodied that in a kind of cartoonish way with his like get rich quick books and his you know, I'm a deal maker, and his whole look and his buildings and just the whole kind of brand of Trump just is a kind of distillation of that. And I know he's a big adherent of like Norman Vincent Peale's The Power of Positive Thinking, and which, as I understand it, is all about the idea that, you know, we can create our reality with you know, our thinking. And like that's you know, not that I have a problem with positive thinking or the idea that we can create reality. I mean, I think that I'm really excited about the potentials for the new realities we can create, but it's like we need to do so in a responsible way. And what we've seen is like that power of positive thinking and reality creation and everything. It's amoral, right? It's neither good nor bad in the hands of the wrong person. That can be very destructive. And so I really feel that coming up right now.
Yeah, like it makes me think about like that toxic positivity, that's the way Mary Trump described the Norman Vincent Peale like ideation, and his father would, you know, winner at all costs, you know, otherwise you have to be a killer or you're a loser.
Yeah.
And but the toxic positivity, that's also denial.
Absolutely.
Like that's the principle of denial. Like it's right there with it. So like, and it, like you're saying, like clearly positive thinking works really well. He was able to manifest a tremendous amount in his life due to that principle. The problem though is and it's true for all of us. Like we can manifest so much, you know, but where we have to, like you're saying, it's amoral if we're not doing the critical self-reflection and what is it that we're bringing into the world in our orientation towards positivity. Is it for us, or is it for the collective? Is it for the betterment of the community and us, you know, the whole, rather than just ourselves? Because clearly we can manifest through positive intentionality, and we want to do that, but it has to have moral boundaries, you know, and that is the ultimate issue here is, yes, we want to have positive thinking and manifest our intentions, our dreams, but it has to be in concert with the whole. And that could have been a possibility for him, but it wasn't, you know, and ultimately that's the reason that all of the ideas, the dreams that he had failed, is because he didn't do the necessary adjustment for other people, for the betterment of the whole.
Yeah, great thoughts. Great thoughts. Any closing thoughts? And you again mention your websites and say goodbye. It's probably a good time.
Sure. I just want to say that we're in a really amazing position right now at this current moment. The fact that, you know, we had someone try to tyrannically take hold of our democracy, and it failed, and then he showed us how that could happen, and in ways in which we can prepare for it if it were to happen with someone who's competent, to be able to you know, warn away against this experience. So I just have a lot of positive you know, orientation around what's happening. And yeah, Archetypal View, that's my website. So please contact me.
Thanks, Chad.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chad and Renn. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I also think that, you know, Erica brought up consensus reality a lot today, and I think that we are kind of standing at a moment where, like, we have the possibility of editing consensus reality, and every, you know, maybe with Jupiter and Saturn, every 20 years, consensus reality gets like a few edits and things, and this is a particularly powerful one. And so, you know, just keeping in mind these ideas of all of the shadow that has been kind of unleashed for us to keep our eye on, I guess, and recognize, and the idea that we really are creating a new future now. And you know, what do we really want that to be? Do we really want to keep playing these same old games again and again? Anyway, so those thoughts are with me right now. Anyway, it's Alex Stein, astrology.com, and it's Stein, Stein. So yeah, thank you. Thanks a lot.
Oh, thank you, Alex. You were both awesome. I'm going to attempt to share my screen one last time here. Share.
Real quick.
Yeah.
Real quick on what you were saying, Alex, about the Uranus Neptune being raised in that, and then coming into the Saturn Pluto. Yeah, it's there's a clear way in which there's a, you know, kind of a innocent naivete optimism with the Uranus Neptune, and the Saturn Pluto is like we're really facing the moral the shadow of who we are, and it's a difficult process, and it's super heavy, but like it's extremely beneficial. Like, this is a really a healing time where we are facing the racism in us. You know, we're seeing it, the unconscious racism, like in ways in which we didn't realize we were that. We are being forced to face that, and
absolutely,
that's a really healthy dynamic, that you know, healthy aspect of the Saturn Pluto complex that can ultimately help us be, you know, more in spirit, you know, spiritual, you know, grounded spiritual practitioners. With Uranus Neptune.
And it's an interesting thing for me, because you know, I guess the exennials, or like people like me who were born in like the early 80s, were born with that Saturn Pluto, and you know, we first voted in the first term of the, you know, what came to be the Bush administration, and just really had this sense of just like, man, everything is, you know, just nothing matters, and just
Right.
And then the young, you know, the millennials right after us carry that Uranus Neptune energy really strongly, and I feel like now there's this way in which this generation is like kind of working itself out in an interesting way. It's interesting for me to think about how people born in the 80s and 90s are kind of interacting with the energies of today. So, but that's more for another time, I guess.
That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you both so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Really appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Renn.
Just to have a closing thought, and I'll say goodbye as well. You can see this big screen?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, great. So we've been talking about the shadow that Trump has embodied and displayed for us all to look at. And, you know, this is from the work of Stanislav Grof, this basic perinatal matrix 3. It's connected with the dynamic stage of birth labor. It's also connected with the death rebirth struggle in a spiritual way. And then Rick Tarnas made the correlations between these 4 stages of the birth process and the archetypal natures of Neptune, Saturn, Pluto, Uranus. So I call it the Grof-Tarnas perinatal sequence. And we've been in that Uranus-Pluto square since 2007. And the events of yesterday certainly a vivid expression of that archetypal complex. The problem is that so many human beings in modern industrial civilization do not have ways to process these powerful plutonic leftovers. People, we are wounded. We are filled with aggression, and you know, sadistic feelings are connected with this. There's demonic energy Grof found, scatological themes, pyrocathartic themes, all associated with Pluto and basic perinatal matrix 3. And, you know, I feel for people that were misled by Trump. It's an intolerable way to live, to just suppress these wounds and these volcanic energies in our psyches. It is a very difficult way to live. But modern industrial, you know, materialistic, scientific society asks us to do just that. We're supposed to just live on the surface of our psyches and engineer a better world for ourselves through our acquisition, our achievement, and so on. The only way we can really reach a state of happiness is to clear out these leftovers from our unconscious. And what the end of Trump's era represents to many people that supported him is that this promise, this false dream that they could somehow reach this state of rebirth, of reconnection with the divine, of satisfaction, of happiness, of breakthrough, is now over. Now it's just back to business as usual, and that's an intolerable proposition for people. So I feel for people, but the way forward is not through these demagogues that offer a false promise or messianic false, you know, illusion that they can somehow save us. It's through every individual who wants to have access to powerful processes like holotropic breathwork, psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, and similar techniques where they can face and resolve their leftovers in a supportive context. So people have desperate yearnings for deliverance, and that's understandable, and Trump capitalized on that. The way forward for us is to be aware that these volcanic energies of BPM3 Pluto will pose a threat to democracy in the future if the conditions are ripe. Probably the next major threat would be during the Uranus-Pluto opposition in about, I don't know what, 35 years or so. But who knows? So that is our most important safety, as Jung knew and as Grof knows, is to more percentage of the population needs to do that inner work to get rid of that collective pool of energy. So both of you gentlemen have touched on that need to face our shadows. So thank you for people who have watched this, thanks so much for tuning in. Please write a comment after this video and maybe share where you are viewing from. You can also support us by liking and sharing this video and by subscribing to our channel, Astrology News Network. Happy transits and take care.
Thanks.